Welcome to the Heather Penny Podcast, where our goal is to help you reach your potential by increasing clarity, building confidence, and engaging courage. Heather is a leadership coach, trusted advisor, and admired author. I'm Christina Morales, a writer and marketer, and Heather is my dear friend and confidant. We started these podcasts because we're having great conversations, and we wanted you to come along for the ride. So today we're tackling another vital topic, implementing the right side of your brain. And so, Heather, we discussed this briefly in a recent podcast, but I'd really like to dig deep here. Can you explain the difference between the right side of your brain and the left side of your brain? What do you mean by that?
Yeah, the left side of your brain is really more of like the logic and the critical thinking, very important for everything we do. The right side is a little bit more of the artistic, the creative expression, the emotional side. Both are really important. What happens as we continue to grow and get older, we have less opportunity to engage the right side of our brain.
Mm-hmm.
And so we start becoming overly dependent and really using that left side of our brain. And it's almost like we get a little off kilter.
Uh-huh.
And so how we engage the right side of the brain is critical as adults and figuring out what works for you. There's a myriad of ways to do it. But things like art, poetry, singing, songs, music, crafts, doing things with your hands, any of these kind of things, these are ways that we engage the right side of our brain, that it allows us to start really doing things and engaging our creativity in whole new ways. So that left and the right lobes are critical. And if you can understand when you're doing an activity, which lobe you're engaging more than the other, you can start really growing more of that brain activity on either side of your lobe.
Mm-hmm. So are we born dominant with one side or the other? I mean, I hate to sound sexist, but when I was little, we used to say that boys were good at math and science and girls were good at like English and history. And so are we born dominant with one side or the other? Is it gender specific? How does that work?
Well, yes and no, and I won't even pretend to be any kind of neurophysicist or neuroscientist at all, but it's really this reality. Particularly when I was working as an educator, I saw that we can nurture one side more than the other, and we can lean more toward one side or the other. One of the things to be aware of is typically the hemisphere, that the kind of the bridge that links the two hemispheres in females, the bridge is smaller, narrower. So that's why you can go back and forth quicker in females. Males, it's why the people kind of joke about them being a little bit more compartmentalized. The bridge is larger, so it takes a little longer to go back and forth between the lobes. But that typically is I don't know if that's gender stereotype. I don't know if it's a little bit more of how the brains are created more in females and males. I mean, that's a whole other discussion. But I think if you're aware of the fact that that bridge between the two lobes can be bigger and smaller, is really how we go back and forth between the lobes. And that's what allows us to multitask and all these different things.
That's so interesting. There's so many comments I want to say that I shouldn't. So I'm going to keep moving on.
Yeah, I know. I try to stay away from those gender biases, but some of them, they're a bias for a reason.
Yes, some of those bridges are like the Golden Gate. It takes a really long time to cross. Oh, no.
Right. Awareness without the judgment. You know what I mean?
Exactly. So why is it important to tap into both sides of our brain? How do we get them to function and be compatible with each other?
Yeah, it's a great question. I think one of the things to be aware of is that the emotions are really lodged a lot more on that right side. And I've joked with some of these male clients I worked with, I've loved working with them, but one of them in particular, we started calling them those pesky emotions. He just didn't like them because he's like, they keep getting in the way of my work. And I go, I know, they're so pesky. They're so annoying. You're getting angry. You're disappointed. You're frustrated. You're feeling betrayed. You go down this litany of lists. But I said, if we don't integrate them and deal with them, what happens is we start staying stuck. So, and yes, they can be so pesky. So I always kind of affirm people that I go, yeah, they can be really pesky because they keep us stuck if we keep trying to ignore them. One of the things we want to do is continue to honor them. So on the right side of our brain, that's where a lot of them are lodged. So if you're not engaging the right side of your brain, you're not able to emotionally heal or move the emotions a little bit more into and integrate more. And I think some of us over course correct because we've seen those really highly emotive people where we're like, oh my gosh, they're melting down. It's where we get all these negative terms like snowflake generation, the cupcake generation. It's a negative term we're giving some of these populations saying you're way over feeling, way oversensitive. So I'm going to course correct and go the other way and only live more in the logic. Well, that's a reaction to someone else's style of living. And it's also diminishing and marginalizing a group of people. So I don't agree with any of that. I feel like the more we live integrated, the more we're giving ourselves the opportunity to really be whole human beings. Mm-hmm. How we do that is the individual journey that all of us have to take.
Mm-hmm. So now we've talked a little bit about the right side of the brain. In a past podcast, you talked about doodling and drawing and painting, and those things are vital to our clarity and rest. Can you dig a little deeper today and talk about how those two are tied together?
Sure. I'll give you my personal example with that. I was very left brain dominant because that's where I got results. Being a teacher and a high level student, I liked the kind of the high that I got out of getting that A and moving it forward. Many things as we advance in life are really left brain dominated. How you write an essay, how you connect with people, how you show up for an assignment at your work or your task. A lot is left brain dominated. So we get a lot of kudos out of that. We learned that's where we get our positive strokes. Mm-hmm. The right side of the brain, like maybe doing pottery or coloring or doodling or engaging with poetry, you'll notice it doesn't have a little bit that productivity that a lot of our world really give accolades to. Mm-hmm. So a lot of times then we don't give it the respect it deserves. The reality is if you can simple as doodle like 10, 15 minutes a day, you're engaging that right side of the brain. It's a really quick way to do it. I even have songs I'll listen to anywhere from 6 to 7 minutes can completely change how you're thinking and engage that right side of the brain. I found this out when I started actually working on myself and getting counseling in my late 20s. I've heard people, if you've heard me talk about a little bit of just depression and anxiety, but I remember working with my counselor. I could talk circles around her and around the issue, but it was my way of avoiding it. Mm-hmm. One of the things she did is I still remember it poignantly, 25 plus years ago saying, Heather, I'm going to leave the room. Here's a pad of paper. Here's a bunch of coloring pencils, and I want you to draw what you're feeling. I did not like that.
Did you think she was crazy? Like, seriously, you're leaving the room and having me do this?
Exactly. And I was annoyed because it didn't feel, quote, intelligent, or it didn't feel productive, or it didn't feel like I could stay in control. What is she doing? She's starting to engage the right side of my brain. And what I drew began to be how I began to talk about some of the painful things in my life that I didn't have words for, or honestly, I didn't want to have words for it. I was spending more time avoiding it. So once I began to recognize the power of drawing things, and I'm a lame drawer. I always tell people, you don't have to be Da Vinci. You don't have to be this amazing drawer. It's the act of drawing a stick figure and saying, here's what's happening, or an imagery. That was what really introduced me to engaging the right side of my brain and helped me understand what was going on with me emotionally so that I could begin to heal and really integrate more and become more of a whole person. My logic, it's almost like working, lifting a 20-pound weight on the left side all the time, and you're lifting maybe a 1-pound weight on your right side, or nothing at all. It starts to atrophy, but you become very powerful and strong in that left lobe, and so you want to continue to operate out of it. What we don't realize is that we're a little uncomfortable with maybe the emotions or some of the pain that we've kind of compartmentalized and put aside, and we don't want to engage the right side because if we listen to that song, it's going to make us cry. Mm-hmm. Or if I actually draw what I'm feeling, it's going to look terrible on paper. We aren't going to like the image that's staring back at us. So things like this began to really challenge me to hold myself accountable. If I want to have personal growth and get past things, first thing I do is find ways to engage the right side of my brain.
Mm-hmm. If you handed me a notepad right now and a pen and said, here, draw, I think I would be stuck. I think the pen would just hover above the paper. So how do you get past that wall to just start free flow drawing?
Well, it's a great question. Again, as an educator, when I do workshops on this, the very first thing I have to say is because art is connected to our heart. Many of us have been damaged with it. If I talk to any individual, there's been some point in your younger years where you were probably shamed with your art, whether it came externally, like a teacher telling you that that's a terrible drawing, or whether it was internally, like, oh my gosh, I don't know how to draw a face. There's usually shame attached to any form of art. Once I can just address it, and I appeal to the left side of the brain, the logic, and say, listen, we've all been shamed at some point or another, and it was usually in our younger years where we felt really stupid with art. So that, what do? We make this vow, I will never do art again, and I'm terrible at art. That's the main thing you have to get past, is the shame with that. The other thing too is I give people the permission, don't worry, if you don't like art, that's fine. Do poetry. Do a coloring book and just coloring the lines. The actual act of just coloring that rhythm back and forth engages the right side of your brain. So then you're kind of getting that critic, that inner critic out of the way, who's sitting there going, oh my gosh, you're terrible drawing humans. You're getting that inner critic out of the way and say, this isn't about criticizing. This is just about engaging the right side of your brain. So we have that shame piece that's often connected to art that usually happen in our younger years.
Do you usually keep your drawings to see your progress, or do you get it out and then, like, I mean, you don't want to throw it away, but what's the process with that? I don't know. Like, if I had something painful out, I'd want to purge myself and then crumple it up and throw it away and say, okay, I processed it. Is there a process to this?
Yeah, it's a great question. You know, I'm in a season right now where I'm just not doing much drawing because I don't feel like I want to or need to. So I'm doing doodling, I'm listening to a lot of music when I'm on walks. Because I'm doing more sedentary work on my phone and at my desk, to sit there and doodle would be one more sedentary thing for me, and I don't want to do that. So I'm in a season where my right side of the brain engaged is a little bit more being active and staying active in that. And so as I think about pictures, it's funny, I can visualize something 25 years ago. I can still see the picture in my mind's eye of what I was dealing with. And it was a harsh picture where I was being hard on myself. And I'll tell you the picture. It was me with a bat in my hand hitting myself over the head.
Wow.
Yeah, powerful. But I can still see it in my mind's eye. Whether I crumpled it up or not is irrelevant. I could probably go find it somewhere in my house. I have no idea where it is right now, but I probably could pull it out because I didn't throw it away. But I didn't need to worry about keeping it or throwing it away. I can still see it in my mind's eye, and that's what changed the conversation with my therapist, with my coach, with my husband, with my kids. And here I am, you know, almost, golly, 30 years later. No, I mean, 10 years later.
Being 29.
Oh, yeah, I hit half a decade or half a century this year. So here I am, you know, decades later, and I still remember that because it was so poignant that that's my tendency. When I fail, I'm hard on me. That's my journey that I want to own. That's where I engage the right side of my brain. That's what I tell myself. Hey, Heath, it's okay. This didn't feel good. This was an uncomfortable situation. You dropped the ball here. Something fell out underneath you. You don't need to feel shame. We get to work through this. We get to troubleshoot. We get to invite the right people in to help you move through this. You don't need to stay stuck in it. That begins the inner dialogue that I have to have with myself, because my tendency is, oh my gosh, you failed. All of it's on you. You suck. And the downward spiral begins, right? And that all came from one picture. That's when the therapist left the room and said, yeah, we're kind of done talking. So thank you, Gail. Gail was my therapist.
So one thing I love is you mentioned that there's a painting that's in your office. And when you first painted it, you got out your emotions and your thoughts, and it was a darker color. And then over the years, you've lightened it up because it's evolved as you have evolved. Can you tell us a little bit about that? I love that story.
Wow, that's so cool. Okay, so I'm going to try to show it to you on the screen. If we're on Zoom, we're on podcast. Sorry, you can check it out on Zoom on our website later. But there it is right there. It used to be really strong, dark colors of yellows and dark blues, and now it's pastels. So the first about 10 years, I kept it really dark colors. It was very strong. It's a picture of this It's kind of a divine presence, kind of bending over what looks like a little uh, bean, bean, like a little lima bean almost. And it's representing me as a human being. It's kind of bending over and protective of this being. And the painting is called The Being. And it was actually a reaction to my first drawing of hit myself over the head with the bat. So
Wow.
I needed, once I saw that picture staring back at me, I thought, I need a new picture. So
Yes.
no wonder I'm depressed, you right? Again, I don't mean to make light of depression, but again, when it's so far out, you're like, it's so nice to get the clarity of this is
Yeah.
why I'm down the dumps. I'm my worst critic. So I
Mm.
needed a new picture. And that was the picture that I drew that really showed this presence of love and grace and kindness and goodness that is with me all the time. And it's who I call God. And it's this unconditional love and presence. So therefore, I get to share in that and offer that to myself. So it's this really beautiful painting I have in every office. And as after about 10 years, I moved into lighter colors because it began to be more of a peaceful feel instead of this dominant, powerful feel, which I needed to feel in probably the first decade. So that's kind of the story behind that.
I love that we went from just doodling and getting your emotions out to now you have this constant reminder of how far you've come and how loved and precious you are. So
Yeah,
even though we think it's just, pen to paper, it's so powerful. So
right.
thank you for sharing that.
Sure.
So can we talk a little bit about the process? Like, is this a passive thinking process? Like going for a walk, listening to a music, creating art that allows your mind to flow. But I also love to sew, bake, or sometimes I like watching movies and I end up being stressed because the pattern doesn't work right or I forgot to measure my baking powder right. So is this a passive process that we kind of let our mind flow, or is this an active mind thinking process and it's the process of creating something?
It can be both.
Okay.
What you want to do is at the end of it, just kind of evaluate, was that what I needed? So I'll give you a couple examples. There's one client I'm working with now. I absolutely love her. And she's lost her mother and her father in just a matter of 2 years.
Wow.
Yeah. So what happens when that happens in the grief process, the creativity goes out the window. Like what I call it is your whole world just goes gray. You've lost all the color out of it. It
Mm-hmm.
takes a while for the color to come back in. It's probably the best metaphor. So as she's dealing with the very black and white kind of gray world here, waiting for the color to come back in, the way she's healing is she doesn't have anything in her to go try a new recipe or do a new
Mm-hmm.
painting, right? Or to sew a new quilt or whatever it is that we do to navigate that or write poetry. So what she's doing is I recommended creating what I call a grief playlist. So she's just sitting in nature and listening to these songs to really get in touch with the grief that she's holding. As that's happening, you can see the healing happening. We just talked
Mm-hmm.
today and she was like, I think I'm ready to dream again. And she said, you warned me it was going to be about a year. I said, yeah. Color coming back into your life. She goes, color's starting to come back in my life. I'm ready to dream again.
Wow.
But that's because she honored that right side of the brain. She engaged it and recognizing this basic truth. We cannot heal without engaging the right side of your brain. So I work with, again, all these high achievers and overachievers in this world who they just want to keep pushing. And I gently step in and say, if you don't engage the right side of your brain, you're going to be limiting yourself. So that's an example kind of with suffering or grief. Another example, just day-to-day living, like you're not living through suffering or grief, is just to promote more peace and love, right? So if you're living with this sense of, that growing anxiety, and it could be as little as I got to get the dinner on, or the kids are waiting, or I have a phone call coming in, or I got to get that doctor's appointment, or my parents are coming over, or whatever it is that we're dealing with, our next job task that we're trying to get accomplished, there's this growing sense of anxiety that's happening. Living with this day-to-day kind of anxiety that we all live with, how we engage the right side of the brain is a powerful way to start mitigating that.
Mm-hmm.
Now, do we mitigate the anxiety or the angst or the fear, the insecurity that starts building, but we start creating a peace and a love. And it can be as simple as 5 minutes listening to a song. So I will have maybe 10 minutes between clients, and sometimes there'll be some heavy conversations, and I've had maybe 3 or 4 calls back to back to back, and I work quite a bit. And I'll say, I got 10 minutes and I can feel the weight of the world on my shoulders, right? I got to let this go because I'm not God. I'm just another little human being trying to figure out this world too. But how I have to do is let it go and just say, okay, here's what I have 10 minutes. I have a song ready to go that helps infuse that right side of the brain and get that healing back going.
Mm-hmm.
And that peace and that love again, reminding me of who I am and what I want to offer. I might have 5 minutes to just kind of doodle. Even if I just have a pencil in my hand, I'll just start kind of coloring and just drawing or doing something to start engaging that right side of the brain to allow me to start feeling that peacefulness. Mm-hmm. I actually do art with people and do the workshops. I encourage them, just try doodling or just coloring in a coloring book. I don't care. Do not do anything that creates self-judgment or critique. If you can't get past that, then just color in a coloring book. If you want to start experimenting with that, recognize the critique and the judgment's going to be there and shut it down. Mm-hmm. But I will recommend people just do it 10 minutes a day. See how you start feeling. I've had doing it now for, 15, 20 years, doing these workshops. I've had reoccurring people come back and say, Heather, I did exactly what you said. I only had time for 5 or 10 minutes of doodling a day. It changed my life because it got me back on engaging the right side of my brain. I had one woman say, I came to your workshop the first year and I started doing it 10 minutes a day. I'm back here a second year in a row to tell you it completely helped me make the decisions I need to make. I was in so much pain when I came to your workshop, so much confusion. Just doing that act of doodling 10 minutes a day helped me just get my peace back so that I could navigate through a tremendous amount of life shift and decisions that I had to deal with, much less the grief and suffering of that.
Mm-hmm. That's amazing. I'm curious to know, what are some things on your playlist? What do you like to listen to?
Well, it depends what mood I'm in. I've literally got I label. I've got a grief playlist if I'm trying to access grief, because I'm a type that doesn't really like those pesky emotions. Yes. I want to be happy all the time. So if I know that I'm kind of feeling sadness, which usually comes up with trying to do more or eating more or whatever it is that I turn to try and cope, I go, I got to feel some sadness here. You know, I've got to deal with this. So I have a grief playlist and I'll just kind of sit in nature and listen to that. And I've got.
So is it mellow and it matches your emotions, or it gives voice to your emotions? So it's going to be something more brooding and.
Yes. I'm pulling it up now just to look at what I have on it. But yeah, it's things that just say loss and happening and kinder things. I listen to everything. If it stirs my heart and it gives me what I need in that moment, I will capture it and put it on a playlist. I have a hope playlist. I have a courage playlist. I have a clarity playlist. I have a confidence playlist. I have reflective music that I listen to when I want to do art that gets me in that mood. You name it, but the music alone helps me wherever it is that I'm trying to access that right side of the brain. I have to work a little harder because I don't want to feel it, to be honest. So I will have to, if I want to sit down and really feel something, I have to sit down with my journal, maybe my colored pens, and I have to put on my classical music or these different lists. I have some powerful songs that remind me of my identity. I have a playlist called My Identity. I don't want to forget who I am. There's a song I listen to that talks so much about freedom. My call to live in freedom and not let anything stop me. There's always stuff that's trying to stop you being less than who you are. So I want to grab onto that. And so I capture some of these songs, and it's a quick way to engage the right side of your brain when you have 2 minutes, 3 minutes, 4 minutes. You can see the actual time of those songs and you go, I've got 4 minutes to reorient my identity. Press play. So it's I keep myself organized with a fast-paced life so that I can keep that right brain engaged when I need it.
And do you find that the average person, though, thinks I'm not an artist and I'm really bad at drawing and painting, I can't do that, or I can't sit still? So is that one of the main obstacles that people are facing?
Totally. When I do a workshop, I have to I call it the 1, 2, 3. You know, if you're a 1, raise your hand. That means you can't wait to be here. When you heard that there was art, you came running to my workshop. Okay, that's your 1. If you're a 2, you're kind of like, I'm trying to be open, but I'm a little insecure. You know, that's a 2. And then I would have people raise their hand. Then I say, okay, now there's a 3. You got drugged here by a friend, or you're trying to do something really big outside your comfort zone, but you're just inches from trying to run out the door. then, right? And the whole room bursts out laughing. And then, of course, I have a lot of threes that raise their hand. What I'm trying to do is normalize that we're all intimidated by art. But I have to press the question, why? Why? It's so harmless, and yet we have created this incredible amount of pressure and insecurity around it that probably started in our childhood, somewhere along the line. Because art is connected to our heart, we got told your art isn't as pretty as someone else's, or you can't do it as well as someone else's. I believe that is a very dark lie we begin to believe when art has nothing to do. Art should never be subjective. It only gets to be what you value and how you feel. When did it get started to get critiqued? And so one of the values I even as an educator is I will never give you a grade on your art. You know, I'll tell you whether you did it or not, you know, but you get to show up and give me what art looks like to you. We need more of that. The moment we start critiquing it, we start feeling this pressure of, I am not an artist. And we want to be able to use art as a tool to engage the right side of your brain. Now, let me be clear. Is there practices of art that we want to grow in? Of course. You know, if you're wanting art to be part of your profession, you want to grow how to do dimensions and how to actually draw a human being, all these different things. Yes, I celebrate you growing that and that as a practice. But if you're going to be using art as a tool to access your heart and your emotions, you want to get that inner critic out of the way, or that third grade teacher that told you you didn't know how to draw, right?
So what does it look like at your conferences and seminars? I can just picture, you know, when you're like in elementary school and you have a test and you put up all the like little cardboard borders around so no one can cheat. Is everybody curled up because you don't want other people to see what you're drawing? Are they paranoid?
Totally. It's the funniest thing. We even have joked about it, you know, as people get more and more secure with how normal the shame is, we're able to start kind of laughing at, oh my gosh, I am curled up in the corner and I won't let anyone see my art. But you can see that that's a really young place, right? My job, whenever I bring art to a conversation, is to help normalize it, that we're not looking to see who's the next best artist, nor am I going to take your paper and hold it up in front of 250 people. Hey, everybody, look at this. Right. But I'm going to help you honor yourself, and it's not about being the perfect artist. It's about letting yourself explore and discover. If we can get past that barrier, we can go a long way. So the very act of getting in the same room and doing art with people is a very powerful, vulnerable journey. But it's important for us to try that if we want to engage the right side of our brain in a new way.
And do most people, when you say, okay, time's up, do they say finally, or are they like, no, wait, just give me 5 more minutes?
Yep. Yeah, what happens typically is I usually do, the workshop's usually an hour and a half, and I give them about a 20 to 25 minute playlist. The music is what soothes people because they're already freaking out that I've left them with coloring pens and a blank. Like most people are. My ones who are super artists, they can't wait. They're like, finally, she stopped talking. She's letting me do my art. I always have the ones in my workshops, but it's those threes, those twos and those threes that are a little nervous. And typically once they can relax and the music helps them relax, you know, this is what I'm doing. I'm setting the mood that, hey, don't worry. I've already talked about shame. We're shutting down the inner critic. We're shutting down shame in the room. They don't even realize, and they start getting lost in it. I give them a really safe exercise, a really safe doodle to do. My ones don't want to do the doodles. They want to sit there and just go for it. So I say, go for it. You know, I let people be wherever they're at. But my twos and the threes, they like the safe structure, and I want to help honor that. So I have them do a really safe doodle so they're not having to feel the pressure to compare their art with their neighbor next to them. So that's what keeps it really safe. You know, I don't just give them a free for all and say, okay, everyone draw something and then show me. I help set it up for success because I know there's so much trepidation around it. But what I then do is, it's so funny, once they move in the right side of their brain and they have started relaxing, they go, what? The 20 minutes are up? And I go, yeah. And most of them will go, it felt like 5 or 10 minutes. I said, that's what happens when we're really securely in the right side of our brain. We lose track of that time.
Well, that's about all the time we have for today. This has been so great and so informative. Please subscribe to the Heather Penny podcast for questions, comments, and resources. And please visit heatherpenny.com. And I'll also be sure to put a picture of your painting on the website too, because that's such an important part of your story and it's so beautiful. Remember, to live your best life, you have to live intentionally. Have a great day, and we can't wait for you to join us next week. Thank you, Heather.
You're welcome. Live in freedom, everyone.